Dateline is on tonight with an all-new 2-hour episode. It focuses on a case that we have covered extensively here. South Carolina mother Susan Smith was frantically looking for her two sons, Michael and Alex, who she had said had been taken from her during a carjacking. This initiated a nationwide manhunt and topping headlines for a long time. But those cries for help, they turned out to be a total lie. Today, co-anchor and South Carolina native Craig Melvin joins us now live in New York with a preview. He's also, we should say, the correspondent for this Dateline episode. Craig, good to see you, my friend.
Hey, good to see you again as well, Ben. Thank you.
So this is a 30-year-old event. It's not even a cold case anymore. We know what happened. Why do you think this story still resonates with so many people?
You know, Ben, for a number of reasons. And the reality is, as you know, we live in a time where a lot of folks have become pretty desensitized to most things. But this is one of those cases that even now, 30 years later, a lot of people find so unfathomable. You had this woman not far from where you are there in Charlotte, this woman down in Union, South Carolina, who concocted this elaborate tale of a carjacking by a black guy at a stoplight. It triggers this nationwide manhunt, and for 9 days she would periodically go on television with her then husband pleading for people to help find her little boys. And she knew in her heart of hearts from the very beginning it was all a lie. And I think that people back then found it just so appalling and disgusting. Not even that she would do what she did, but she would lie about it for so long. And I think even now, because the reality is, unfortunately, Ben, parents have killed children. They did it before Susan Smith. They've done it since then. But the way in which she did it, and then the elaborate lie she told about it, I still think a lot of folks have a hard time getting their head around that.
It's interesting, Craig, because we revisit some of these old cases, whether it's this case, whether it's the Menendez brothers, whether it's OJ. And you and I were both young when they happened. We probably remember them. You were there in South Carolina. Now, as adult men looking at this with a new lens, it's shocking about how gruesome it is. What did you learn while reporting the story that you might not have understood or had an appreciation for before?
You know, David Smith, Ben, the ex-husband of Susan Smith. David hasn't done a lot of interviews over the years. He sat down with us exclusively, primarily because he wants to make sure Susan Smith never gets out of prison. He wants to make sure that she's not seen as some sort of sympathetic character on any level. I mean, during the course of the trial back then, it was revealed that she was the victim of abuse. She had allegedly been depressed. She had a rough upbringing. And David acknowledges that during the course of our conversation. But he also wants to make sure that no one ever thinks that justifies what she did. And I also, until sitting down with him, I did not fully appreciate how 30 years later, this is something he hasn't been able to move past. It really is, it was for me at least, it was hard to sit there and hear him talk about his darkest of days. And, you know, he nearly took his life on more than one occasion. And he talks about that. And he talks about how people still come up to him in grocery stores. And they talk about how they prayed for those two little boys and how they prayed that they would be found and how they prayed for David and Susan. And so he's, you know, he's never been able to really be known as anything other than David Smith, the poor man who had his two sons killed by his wife. And so I learned a lot from my conversation with David. I think folks who watch tonight, I think they'll learn a lot from these letters that Susan Smith has been writing with a Dateline producer for 20 years. They've been corresponding. They're roughly 50 letters. You get an insight into what Susan was thinking then and what she thinks now. And I think a lot of folks will find those letters pretty fascinating tonight.
Let's touch on that a little bit more. What was your takeaway from some of those letters? And also, I know she had that parole hearing back a few months ago. What was your takeaway from those?
Well, it should be noted, Susan, she thought that there was a good chance that she was going to be paroled. And so the fact that the board voted unanimously to not parole her, that's something that we talk about in the 2-hour special tonight. David addressed the hordes of reporters and photographers who had assembled. This is the first time that she was up for parole. And there is David Smith, flanked by his new wife, flanked by a number of law enforcement agents who were also involved in the search back then, were also there at that parole hearing. I mean, listen, the reality is, and we talk about this, David and I, we treat abuse, we treat depression, we treat addiction, we treat things differently now than we did 30 years ago. We look at things through a lens now that perhaps they weren't looked at. We didn't use that lens back in 1994 when this happened. David Smith's contention is we should not do that. We should view this through the same lens as it was viewed then. That here was a woman who, despite terrible things having happened to her, what she did was unjustified. And I think that stayed with me, and I think that you'll see, because Susan Smith will be eligible for parole every 2 years. And David told me that every 2 years he'll be right there at that parole hearing explaining why she should not be released. Conversely, Susan's lawyer, David Bruck, he sat down with us as well. And we do spend some time talking about why David and Susan both feel that at some point her debt to society has been paid and she should in fact be paroled.
It's the curse of this story that's never going to go away for these family members, and it's going to come up every 2 years, whether they like it or not. It's going to be a compelling piece of television. I can't wait to watch it myself. Craig Melvin in New York for us this morning. By the way, worth noting, congrats on the big gig. We're proud of you. You're making the Carolinas proud, my friend.
I really appreciate that, Ben. Thank you. It's good to see you again. I think the last time we talked, I was down covering Helene.
That's right. That's right.
Thank
Always
you.
a pleasure.
Good to see you
Always a
again.
pleasure.
Thanks again. I'll try not to screw it up. My goal is just not screw up the new gig.
I don't think you're going to do that, my friend. I don't think you're going to do that. We're proud of you. Take care. Enjoy your weekend, okay? By the way, Dateline's all-new 2-hour episode, Return to the Lake, airs tonight at 9 right here on WCNC Charlotte.